Today we're looking at bleeding Kansas. Hello and welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. Also, I'd love to see your answer to question number 5 in the comments below. So, bleeding Kansas. The term bleeding Kansas really refers to the guerrilla war that broke out in Kansas between pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups between 1854 basically through 1861. And really, this is a mini civil war that is kind of the predecessor to the Civil War that's going to grip the entire nation. Now, this happens as a result of the Kansas and Nebraska Act, which was passed in May of 1854. And if you remember, the Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed slavery to spread into Western territories based on the idea of popular sovereignty, that people could vote in those territories when they apply for statehood, whether or not they want to be a slave state or a free state. Now, in March of 1855, Kansas was ready to vote for a territorial legislature, which is basically kind of the first step towards getting statehood. All right, and it would dictate, this legislature would dictate whether this was really a free state or a slave state. Now, despite the fact that most of the settlers in Kansas favored being a free state, when the time came for the election, there were a bunch of people from Missouri that crossed over the border into Kansas, and they began to basically wreck the polls. And they become known as border ruffians, these guys that come over and vote. And actually, in the vote itself, there was only 1,500 people living in Kansas at the time, but when the vote was taken, there were over 6,000 votes that were cast. So what ends up happening, of course, is the pro-slavery group ends up winning the legislature, and they begin to write laws that favor pro-slavery. In fact, they begin to write laws that say you cannot be involved in our government unless you are pro-slavery. So, of course, the free slavery or the free state supporters, they're outraged by this, and they decide to hold their own election. They decide to set up their own government, and so by 1856, we have two opposing governments in Kansas. The pro-slavery group sets up their center in Lecompton, Kansas, while the anti-slavery group sets up basically their capital in Topeka, Kansas. And both governments begin to form their own armies. And so, of course, they begin to clash, and we begin to have this little mini civil war that breaks out. And so on May 21st of 1856, one of the most famous incidents of bleeding Kansas takes place. 800 pro-slavery Southerners surround the town of Lawrence, Kansas, which was kind of a heart of some of the free state activity. And they go in and begin to basically just destroy the town. They fly a flag that says Southern Rights. One of their main targets was to take out the Free State Hotel in Lawrence, and they actually have artillery with them. They have a cannon with them, and they turn it on the hotel, and they destroy the hotel, and they go on to loot the town. So that occurs on May 21st. But the talk of what's going on in Kansas is being debated, of course, in Washington, D.C., and actually on May 22nd, violence breaks out in Congress in Washington, D.C. over this issue of Kansas. Abolitionist Charles Sumner, who was one of the big leaders in trying to stop the spread of slavery and stop slavery, period, he gives this speech a few days earlier basically saying how terrible it is in Kansas, what's going on, that these pro-slavery groups are basically just, cheating the system, and they're taking over. Well, of course, Southerners didn't like what he had to say, especially a Southerner from South Carolina, Congressman Preston Brooks, and he actually goes onto the floor of the Senate and attacks Charles Sumner with a cane, beating him in the head, and causing brain damage, basically. All right, and so we have violence breaking out there in Congress over this issue of Kansas, and so word of the attack at Lawrence begins to spread across the state, and of course, word of the attack on Charles Sumner begins to spread, and it reaches John Brown. Okay, John Brown is this abolitionist who has come to Kansas to try to fight against the pro-slavery groups. And John Brown is a different type of abolitionist. He doesn't necessarily believe in a peaceful resolution to slavery. He believes it's going to take violence. And when he gets word of this, his sons actually say that John Brown just snaps, that something just happens, that he's like, I'm going to take revenge for what happened at Lawrence and what happened with Charles Sumner. All right, and so on the night of May 24th, 1856, John Brown, 5 of his sons, and 3 other followers, they go to this little settlement known as Pottawatomie Creek, of course, right on the Pottawatomie Creek there in Kansas, and they know that this settlement is basically a pro-slavery settlement. And so they go and they start dragging guys from their houses and killing them very violently, actually using broadswords to kill these pro-slavery men. They end up killing 5 pro-slavery men there at Pottawatomie Creek. And so John Brown becomes, infamous. He becomes known as Pottawatomie Brown for being responsible for the Pottawatomie Massacre. And so he goes into hiding, and he'll resurface, of course, a few years later when we see the raid on Harper's Ferry. But violence in Kansas continues, and the issue of slavery wasn't really settled until the Civil War is really beginning. It isn't until January of 1861 that Kansas is admitted as a free state. But the conflict divides the Democratic Party even further. It serves as a way for the Republican Party to begin to form and argue against the spread of slavery. So Bleeding Kansas really contributed to the division of the country, which eventually leads us towards Civil War. Hopefully you learned something there, and thanks for watching.